Hello, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Team Avatar and my avatar to the Diversity Mahotsav 2023. I am Sumona Chetia, and I will be your host for today's evening. As we start, here are a few hygiene checks for a seamless virtual experience. Please close all of the applications on your computer and log out from your organization's VPN to conserve internet bandwidth. We would like to thank our partners, powered by partner Kellogg Brown and Root Engineering and Construction India Private Limited, supporting partners Genesis and EPAM Systems India Private Limited, and our outreach partner MCCI, Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Our social media hashtags are hashtag Diversity Mahotsav, Hashtag celebrating diversity. Do post your experience at Diversity Mahotsav on your SM handles with the hashtags. I would also like to inform you all that all the Diversity Mahotsav episodes are being streamed live on our YouTube channel. You can watch the Diversity Mahotsav live on YouTube. Click on the link that is pasted on the chat window. My dear esteemed guest, welcome to the Day 10 of Diversity Mahotsav, where the spotlight shines not only on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but on the very essence of what it means to celebrate our human kaleidoscope. Diversity Mahotsav is a month-long festival of sharing, learning, celebrating the uniqueness of every individual, and carrying with us the promise of inclusion into the new year, hosted by myavatar.com, which is the brainchild of Dr. Saundarya Rajesh, founder-president of Avatar Group. Dr. Saundarya Rajesh is among India's most prominent leaders in the space of women's workforce participation. Avatar, the social enterprise founded by Dr. Saundarya, is India's only organization that provides both strategy and organization implementation solutions in DEI. Her work in creating careers for women in the Indian workplace is unparalleled, for which she is referred to as the career doctor. Not only is she among the earliest and most impactful voices to speak, write, and teach about gender inclusion, she has also helped hundreds of companies hire thousands of women professionals through Avatar's work. She is a powerful speaker, author, and a very sought-after DEI strategist. Coming back to today's session, we look forward to unravel the complexities of intersectionality, explore the practicality and possibility of supporting it, and in doing so, sow the seeds of a workplace that celebrates the diverse tapestry of identities among us. And to do that, we have with us two eminent speakers today. Our first speaker, Zoya, is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in the areas of diversity and inclusion, marketing, retail, and digital. Currently, Zoya is the lead for diversity and inclusion and employer branding at Godrej Properties, where they have been instrumental in shaping the company's policies and practices to ensure an inclusive and diverse work environment. Our second speaker, Shirshendu Pandey, is a talent, culture, and capability professional with varied experience in consulting, learning, talent management, and organization development. In his current role at Aristocrat India, he is responsible for driving diversity and inclusion initiatives and is an ally to all. He is gay, out and proud, and is a doctoral scholar researching leadership, followership dynamics in organizations. Hearty welcome, Zoya and Shishendu. We would also like to welcome our moderator, Anju G. Parvati, Vice President, Research and Solutions after Avatar Group. A CBSE national topper and a computer science engineer from BITS Pilani, Anju leads research-based solutioning at Avatar. Working across the length and breadth of DEI metrics for companies, Anju and her team produces several strategic insights for corporate India. She leads corporate India's largest diversity analytics exercises, Working Mother and Avatar 100 Best Companies for Women in India, and Most Inclusive Companies Index. In her career spanning 13 years, she has co-authored several papers on diversity, equity, and inclusion that have been published in journals of national and international repute. Over to you, Anju.
Thank you so much, Sumona. It's a pleasure to moderate this discussion with our eminent speakers today on a topic deep, complex, but when understood can change the purpose and direction of our lives. So the topic today for our discussion is integrating intersectionality. Right? Intersectionality is a concept introduced by researcher Kimberly Crenshaw, and it recognizes the interconnected nature of various social identities and the compounded impact they have on an individual's experiences and opportunities. Today's discussion a candid conversation between two individuals, two leaders who have understood this, who have been able to integrate these elements into their respective workplaces, we will delve into the significance of why intersectionality has to be integrated, and more importantly, explore what are those challenges and the flip side of it, opportunities it presents in fostering inclusivity and equality. If we do a quick search on what intersectionality means, most definitions of intersectionality come along and are tied to discrimination, oppression, unequal, unfair experiences, right? And so it is important to unbundle intersectionality and understand what is the definition and how do we actually, begin to understand intersectionality. Shir, can I request you to tell us, according to you, what does intersectionality mean? How would you define intersectionality?
I think I could definitely take a shot at defining intersectionality, and I have a sense, I have a feeling I'll fail miserably. Uh, I think I would instead try to relate with it and try to explain how I make sense of it. Uh, I think intersectionality is the very nature of diversity. I don't think there is a diversity that's not intersectional. I think the fact that intersectionality was coined much later often surprises me because, I mean, if you pick any individual, they would definitely exist on crossroads, on various intersections across multitudes of identities, both social, political, cultural. You can cut it in any number of ways, and I think. Uh, Intersectionality, therefore, is the true nature of diversity. Often we simplify it when we use theoretical landscape, and even if you look how the theory has critical theories have involved, uh, right from Marxism, where we are talking about haves and have not. There's a polarity. There is basically a duality there. When you talk about gender, there is feminism. It talks about men and women. Again, it's a duality, and all dichotomies are nice to think of in terms of theoretical sense. The moment you talk about a woman, a man, you certainly cannot just restrict yourself to those two labels, because you realize in practice, people flourish, live, thrive across multiple identities. That's how I make sense of it. I make sense of intersectionality by looking at myself, my identities. I am a cisgender man, but I'm a gay cisgender man. In many ways, I'm oppressed. In many ways, I'm privileged. I think that realization to me is the essence of intersectionality, because it kind of gives you some power, and it kind of gives you some sense of realization that in some ways I too am oppressed, so I should be able to relate with other people's oppression.
Thank you, Cher, for opening it so beautifully. And I think I really like the detached, approach that you mentioned, not being inside it, but looking at it, and helping people understand that it's beyond dichotomy, right? It is beyond polarities. There is so much, and very interesting perspective that why did intersectionality get coined so late when in fact each of us carry such diverse experiences and have that mix of identities within us. And I want you to hold on to the thought of power and privilege. I'm going to come back to both of you on very specific aspects around that. Zoya, I come over to you. What does intersectionality mean to you, and how do you think recognizing these multiple intersecting identities will help address some of the systemic inequalities in our workplaces?
I think I love what she started off with, and I would echo the same thing. That why it got coined so late. It's very important to understand why it got coined so late. The thing is that at least in the DEI space or in the organizational or corporate space, we have been speaking about DEI, and we have always picked up cohorts and focused on them. And unfortunately, we've always focused on this approach. Okay, it'll be cis women, it'll be LGBTQ, and it'll be PWD. It comes because of the achievability as a concept, right? But where it comes to play is that in society, there is a concept of individualization and there's a concept of connectedness. We're all individual to in our own percept, but we're all interconnected, and that's how we operate as a society. If we do not understand both of these concepts go together, we cannot focus on one cohort and go ahead. It's I've been in a lot of these sessions and in these meetings when they'll corporates will say that we'll focus only on cis women for now, focus on LGBTQ later, and PWD will pick up later on. It's like saying that if I'm having food and I'm watching TV, I can do both at the same time. The same thing is you can focus on cis women at the same time, you can focus on PWD and LGBTQ. And there is going to be an intersectionality in these cohorts as you look at it, and multiple other ones. I'm just from a very DEI corporate sense, I picked up these three cohorts, but it will keep playing out. So I'll just give you one example. I'm also a board member of Tweet Foundation. Now that's an organization in the space of transgender health and space shelter homes. Just the day before yesterday, we were inducting a person who was speech and hearing impaired and was trans. Now we had to get an ISL interpreter to understand what the communication was so that we could induct them. Now, what is the great thing is that once we started learning that this is the thing, we're now also training all our residents to be ISL, and then we're taking it forward. I'm just saying that we have to just open our gates a little more to understand that it's not just one aspect of thing. I think that for me is the intersectionality. You have to look at it interconnectedness, and you have to look at it from a individualization piece of.
Wow. So yeah, I really liked the analogies that you brought to fore, because one of the objectives of having this Mahotsav, right, which in the Indian context a celebration of diversity, is also to help people understand and really relate to it. Because as long as concepts remain concepts and philosophies and very abstract theories, you feel very distanced from it. But the analogy that you mentioned, right, you can watch TV and eat food. I'm sure my son is going to love that analogy, though. But having said that, you can attend to different things, and our brains are wired that way. And very beautifully put about the interconnectedness, because sometimes I have felt that we shy away from understanding certain concepts because we don't see there is anything in it for us. Because innately we are all human, we are looking at survival, we are looking at thriving and flourishing in our own ways. So if we do not understand the interconnectedness, if we do not understand what that dynamic and that appreciation will bring to us, we are not going to invest ourselves in the process of understanding. So very, very beautifully put by both of you. Thank you so much. The next question, of course, we are here to discuss the good, bad, and the ugly, right? So now that we have some understanding of the canvas, what do you think are some of those myths or misconceptions that are there in the corporate workplace towards integrating intersectionality? Because for the longest time, I think it's myths that has stood in the way between actually opening the gate. So I'm going to borrow that analogy as well, right? Opening the gate. So what do you think if you are to pick a couple of myths that are really out there standing as a deterrent, what would that be? Shir, can I request you to take that?
Sure. I think if I were to take a shot at it, I would say, I think the problem, and I'm specifically now talking about the corporate workspaces, I think corporates thrive with objectivity. I think it's easier, like Zoya said, right? It's a low-hanging fruit to say we're going to have more women in organizations, cisgender women, and that's diversity for us. If you ask most organizations, how do they track diversity and inclusion? It's the percentage of women on their board, percentage of women on their top two layers of the organization. Obviously, if the organization is not just acting on skin deep, they'll go down, but still it will remain that proportion is what gender ratio is what they would probably work with. I think it's achievable, it's easier, it's simpler. I think everyone is happier with it. I think the challenge, however, is, and most social psychologists would speak about it, after we've achieved a certain amount of gender proportion in an organization, you would start having fault lines in the organization. It's a very natural response. You would see this in any group. If you were to objectively observe a group, when you try to increase diversity, the group moves to a place where the group starts recognizing that the minority is now not just minority, they've increased. And the minority also realize that we're not minority anymore, we have a significant voice in the organization. And then you have a power dynamic.
Is there an audio overlap? Is that there for all of you?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's got resolved. So yeah, I think, and I think that is the challenge, that is the consequence of sticking to the a vanilla definition of what DI means, sticking to a particular demographic group and addressing them. We usually hit that hurdle, that we hit that fault line, we start building counter narrative, and many organizations obviously manage it well. Many organizations actually get stuck there, right there. What do we do now? And I think intersectionality is the answer there. So the major challenge essentially is that organizations want simpler things. And if you notice, I think one of the biggest contributions to intersectionality has come from the standpoint theory. Standpoint theory is essentially very, very subjective. You're talking about subjective experience of people. So it kind of in a very simple way, I think it doesn't go very well with that objective. I have a goal. I need to meet that goal. I need to put it in a tracker. I need to send it to all leaders. Please stick to it. Please make sure you have. I think it just doesn't work. So I would say that is the real challenge. Organizations don't tolerate subjectivity very well, and intersectionality. You will have to begin by questioning the objectivity of those two polarities, like I said earlier. Yeah, I think that is the biggest obstacle in my view. Yeah.
Great, great, Shirshindu. Again, beautiful analogies of how pigeonholing and looking at, actual boxing can stand in the way. And the fact that you ignore so many other facets of enrichment that people bring to the table because you have already stuck a label, right? So that's that, and you do not look beyond that. So that restriction and that siloing is probably one big challenge that you brought out. Zoya, according to you, what are some of those myths and misconceptions that are there, which are big obstacles towards true integration of intersectionality?
I think for me the myth is the focus, right? When I started off also, I think it's whether in corporate space or whether in even in society, when we look at it from a government standpoint also, it is how we focus on it and how we distribute resources towards that. Because inclusion is nothing but removing the systemic barriers that exist, right? But to remove the systemic barriers, it requires focus and it requires identification of those barriers, and that requires resources. I think the myth is when we look at it singularity, and then we do not, and then in the whole looking at it singularly, we miss out the complexities of the other or how other intersectionalities will play out. I think so that is one myth for me. The second also is that why corporates are doing this. Or why anybody is doing diversity and inclusion is where the question needs to arise. I think a lot of people are doing DNI without asking the why of it. Firstly, DNI doesn't need to exist. Actually, my role needs to be redundant if there is an equal world, right? I see that whenever I am doing something, that my job becomes as redundant as possible. I can go back to doing something else and not be doing DEI. But I think the problem is the why. And if we answer why we are doing it, like I'll give it in context of GPL. So Godrej as a group does it because it has its value system in place from the Swadeshi movement. It has come and been introduced, and that's why they do it from a value piece of it. From an organizational product perspective, we build homes. We are in the process of building homes, and we provide spaces. A home can be owned and lived by anyone in the community that we serve, right? India. Now it can be owned by any race, any gender, any this. Only affordability is the concept, which also we look at it from a material standpoint. My main thing is that if a home can be owned by anybody, we need to see that we need to build homes for anybody. And to be able to build homes for anybody, we should have the same workforce or representing or mirroring the workforce that we can do. If we are not able to do that, we will not be able to build that home in that space. If, say, for example, persons with disabilities, one cohort, who is a part of the community in India, which is, say, as per 2011 census, is what, 2.1 million, million. If the logic is that if they exist and we have to build homes for them, then we should be incorporating them into a workforce so that they tell us how we build it, right? Otherwise, we'll never be able to build the right product. That's what I'm trying to say. You need to answer the why. Organizations or anybody, when they're doing DI, need to answer the why, then the myths won't arrive. That's how I look at it.
Beautiful, Zoya. I think the aspect of singularity that you brought about and the lack of questioning and trying to understand, because before appreciation, if the why is not something that you ask yourself, you're not going to be able to appreciate anything. So it's very, very important. And unfortunately, we have also, in our experience of working with organizations, when we do some of these sessions, I think the biggest deliberation that happens is why DEI, why equity, because the essential belief is that it's a fair world, it is an equitable world, it is an equal world. Even when we put out stats and we put out all validations of why it is an unequal world, at least in the corporate context, I think the most favorable beliefs seem to be there is equality. So why equity? So if you don't understand why DEI, you are not going to even getting to understand what that E means, or why the distance to equality for somebody is much, much longer than for someone else, right? So very aptly put. And so my next question, and I come back to the power and privilege aspect, Sheer, that you brought out. And we all know the three Ps, very popularly talked about: people, processes, products. And I think we talked about many of those nuances in our conversation so far. But I'm going to ask you about another set of three Ps, which is power, privilege, and purpose, right? So there is a lot of power in these three Ps in terms of influencing actual change on the ground in the workplace. So how do you think organizations and individual leaders can actually embrace and utilize their power and privilege to actually help understand the larger purpose of intersectionality and make sure that the world is more equal than it actually is? Over to you, Cher.
Sure. I think leaders can do a lot. In fact, I would say leaders in many ways set the tone for almost everything that happens in the organization. Leaders are the mechanisms through which we can edit culture of an organization. And when edited, I think culture is self-sustaining. It takes a life of its own. Having said that, it's not easy. More importantly, I think, and my perspective is usually from the leadership and talent management side, is that leaders are usually prototypical leaders. Leaders usually represent majority. I mean, if you think of any leader, you would think a leader represents its people. And I think that is in many ways the challenge, because most leaders rise to power and emerge into leadership by actually relating to pandering to the majority. It's true for politics, it's true for organizations. But if a leader has to still work on DEI, we do know that leaders who work on DEI are fairly transformational, and not just for DEI, but also for the organization. As organizations go through cycles of change, they're very good at rallying people behind for change, not for status quo. Those are some of the gifts that inclusive leaders can offer organizations. But I think specifically intersectionality is something that leaders usually don't go for, but they discover. What I essentially mean is that I've rarely come across a leader who would talk about intersectionality because they want to talk about intersectionality. They usually, the route is to actually start talking about DEI, start doing some work about DEI, and then arrive at a problem that typical DEI's initiatives cannot solve. And that is where we start appreciating intersectionality, because we see this is a bigger bracket than we thought it was. Case in point, we talk about gender. For example, there was a lot of focus in our organization addressing pay gaps between genders. And as we started looking at pay gap in gender, we realized there are men also who are fairly being discriminated against. They're fairly low on their comp ratios. And we're trying to understand if they are actually as good as their ratings suggest. Why is it that they are not getting the same kind of compensation as others are? How can we explain it? And that is where we start seeing intersectionality start, playing a bigger role. So they are men, but they are agreeable men. They are not the dominant men. They are not the ones who are going to fight for better compensation. They are men, but they're probably not the most masculine men of all. They are men, but they're not very good at their English because they come from tier two cities, and growing up they did not have access to probably the best English medium schools. So their English is not as good, and that has a consequence for their compensation. I think the first thing leaders can do is to become genuinely curious about uh, their interactions with people. And if you think about it, that's nothing special. That is what we expect leaders to. That is good leadership. So uh, become more intentional. Try to understand people, their subjective experience. When we interact with people, try to understand where they come from, not just broad sense. Okay, I have on an Excel sheet 50% of my team is men and 50% is women. Wow, I'm such a diverse and inclusive team. I think the more curious we become, the more complex problems we work with, the more we appreciate it, and then solutions become actually very, very clear in front of us. So just to conclude on that, when we actually picked it up, we realized that personality also plays a big role. And these are personality traits that we want. We want cooperative people. We don't want selfish people who are just fighting for better pay for themselves. We want leaders who actually fight for pay, others pay, other individuals who are not getting paid as much. I think that adds to us as an organization. So when we touch intersectionality, we really find amazing avenues of growth and more powerful inclusion in the organization. I'm not sure. I went around and around. I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but yeah.
No, no, absolutely, Sher. And you have also kind of helped us understand the discovery process of intersectionality, right? So if it is a term that's not very well understood today, it is important to also know how do we get there, how do we discover, and you actually put forward a method to that discovery. So look at those, and of course I lead analytics for Avatar, so anything analytical, any methodical framework always inspires me, because I'm like, okay, we can apply it in so many other ways, and so many other activities that we do, right? So how do we get to those systemic inequalities? How do we understand that there are intersectionalities? It is when we are able to also look at that in a critical analytical way. So thank you for walking us through that discovery process, I must say. And over to you, Zoya. I would love to hear from you towards understanding what these three P's mean to you, and what you think, which is privilege, power, and purpose. What you think leaders can do towards actually championing intersectionality.
Okay, very, very strong three words, if I have to say. I think purpose is the main piece. I think everything at the core of stuff that a leader does is focus, whether it's the organization's purpose, whether it is the leader's purpose, or that department purpose. I think that if we are able to define that right, then the other two they will be the guiding factors to reaching the purpose. So I think purpose is key in these three pieces. Um, Once you fix the purpose, then you know that you have a particular power. A leader has that power to make that change. And I'm saying, a leader doesn't need to be an MC member, or means a management committee member. Doesn't need to be a thing. You can be a leader in your own space or in your own function, and you can be driving it downwards. You can be a leader even if you are not having a team. But how you interact with folks is where it is. It is, for me, leadership is level agnostic. You can be a leader and you can play that role of a leader irrespective if you're at a particular level or not. Yes, with level comes power. and then how you use that power to drive it down is where the that team comes. Obviously, you privilege is a piece that will come to you with certain identities that will play off your personal thing. So, say for example, education will be a privilege that you might get because of being in a particular class of economic class, and how we put it up. There are a lot of personal play or personal identities that will play out to give you that privilege, and that privilege will affect your power. But I'm saying if all three combine together to achieve that purpose, then that leader is going to do really right. But yeah, you need to fix your purpose first. Like I know when I joined any company, I look at 3 or 4 value systems on that wall. For me, trust, show respect, care have to be there. If it's not there, I am not a part of that organization. It doesn't make me feel welcoming because it doesn't align to my value system. So I know my value system, I know the organization's value system. They need to match, and then I will use my power. Like right now, like if I don't do, like I myself in the position of at a DEI lead, if I don't do what I do, then I don't do justice to that role that I have been bestowed upon, right? And I have to use it really well so that other people get access and I can create that space. When I look at Godrej, anybody who enters into the walls of Godrej should feel that the bias stays outside those walls. Everything else is performance based. Everything is what they are doing out here. That's how I look at it. And that's how even individual leaders in the organization look at it, or anybody should in that sense. Yeah.
Excellent, Zoya. And again, you actually unbundled power, and the concept of leadership, that you needn't be at a particular hierarchical level to consider yourself a leader and inspire change. And I really liked the stacked way. So if Sheer told us what is the process of discovery, you told us what we have to pack in our bags on that process of discovery, right? So get your purpose fixed. And how do you do that? A simple tip, and I'm sure there are a lot of diversity representatives who are listening in to us today. So do your values resonate with what the organization's value is? And you mentioned elements like trust and respect and care. And in fact, I was just thinking in Avatar, we drive home this really robust framework of inclusion, which includes trust, respect, acknowledgement, and cohesion. We call it track. So to
They are
be on
key.
track.
They are key to society.
Absolutely,
These two
absolutely.
things. So I've worked in organizations like now I'm working in Godrej. I've worked in Tata, and there was another organization you told. All family-driven organizations or family-owned organizations. You have to find trust and respect because that is the key to thing. If I'm saying something that should be respected, or that I will live up to it, and I would want to be treated the same way I will treat somebody else. That is the whole logic of respect. Mm.
Absolutely. And when it boils down to that individual level of understanding, and that's even when COVID was such a disastrous phenomenon, and it is now very much behind us. I think one fundamental landscape change that it did to the world over was that we all got back to the basics. We all understood. I remember sitting in one of these boxes and really, being not able to reach out to people and connect with people, and that dynamic of feeling belong became so crucial and important to every individual, irrespective of where they were in that maturity of the 3 P's of power, privilege, and of course purpose, where it all starts, right? So very, very nicely put. Thank you for that. So now let's come to some practitioner perspectives, because there are a lot of people who drive DEI in their respective organizations who are listening in to us today. So Sheer and Zoya, I would want both of you to address again this question on what are some of your experiences, lived experiences, in terms of integrating intersectionality into the DEI and talent frameworks in your organizations. Sheer, can I request you to take that?
Sure. I think I gave you the example of income.
Mm.
I think, and obviously, it's a well-known fact that let's take US for example. Data in India is very, very difficult to find, but for example, in US, women still earn despite all the progress on feminism and a lot of different uh, discrimination laws and so much other changes in the environment. There's still 17% gender gap. and this is where it becomes interesting. If gender causes 17% disparity, agreeableness as personality trait causes 22% income disparity, extroversion, introversion causes 25% uh, uh, disparity. And when you add these two, you have compounded effects. And as and I think as practitioners, data is a very, very powerful weapon that you can use in organizations. If you have solid talent management data, and you can use that objectivity to build a very strong case that we are seeing something systematically happening. So we have agreeable people. So there are women who succeed in the organization, but they are not agreeable women who are succeed. They're probably disagreeable women who have to act and pretend to be like men to succeed in the organization. What about the agreeable women? What about the introverted agreeable women who are not succeeding? Uh, let's take the example of vulnerability. Often in marketing terms, when we talk about marketing communication and product development, we talk about least sophisticated customer. I often mirror that and say, you should know who's your least, and when I say sophisticated, I replace that with who's your most vulnerable employee. And that usually will start telling you what are the intersectional areas that you actually need to work on. So if you ask all your employees to start working from office and ask them to make that change, who will be the most vulnerable because of that change? Yes, there are going to be women, uh, but there are going to be women uh, who do not have as much domestic responsibility, and there are women who have a lot of domestic responsibility. Maybe new mothers, it's going to be challenging for them. Yes, new mothers, but there are new mothers who do not have a strong uh, economic backing, socioeconomic backing. I think they would be even more challenged because they may not have disposable income to afford a nanny to take care of their kids. Now add that caregiving responsibility for someone aging in your responsibility, and now you're looking at someone who will really break when you make that change happen. So I think from a practitioner standpoint, I think identifying who your most vulnerable group is becomes absolutely critical, because that is where maximum impact from intersectionality can actually happen. Now we were talking about practice, not just saying intersectionality also exists. Yes, we know it exists, but in our specific context, who's most vulnerable and what are the reasons why they're vulnerable. And then you can focus on the right kind of policies to actually alleviate their challenges. And I think change management is the single biggest way where I think intersectionalities reveal themselves. What are the solutions? Solution is, rather than talking about a specific gender, let's address economic. And there's so many beautiful case studies, not in India probably. Even if they are there, it's very hard to read about them. But in US, there's so many companies that have raised their bare minimum wage level, right? And there have been CEOs who have taken a 2% pay cut to make sure that the bare minimum wages in the organization are getting 20% more. It's a sustainable solution, and it's powerful because the moment you touch the socioeconomic aspects, a broad level of intersectional identities actually get alleviated a lot. Whether we could disagree with it as much as we want, we live in a capitalistic societies. I think in many ways our solutions are also very capital in nature. I just took out one example. I'm sure there are others.
Yeah, and I think that was a neat, again, lens that we can all apply, practitioners can apply in their respective workplaces, share about the most vulnerable cohort, right? Of course, vulnerability was always something deeply personal to me, and somehow I'd always thought about it in first person and about being authentic and, how I can use that as looked at it as something that can help us understand the complexities of individuals and the challenges. And I think it is because organizations have actually spent time. I'm not sure if they called it the most vulnerable category, but the kind of organizations that feature in avatars, Avatar and Seramount 100 best companies for women in India, or the Avatar and Seramount most inclusive companies index, they have paid a lot of attention attention to the vulnerabilities. They've paid a lot of attention to what are those enablers that can make it a slightly more level playing field for the most vulnerable ones. So that's a beautiful connect between vulnerability and enablement that I made in my head when you spoke about that, Sher. I come over to you, Zoya, because lived experiences are always rich. And when you share such examples, it strikes a chord with practitioners at so many levels, right? So, what have been some of your experiences in terms of integrating intersectionality at your workplace? Over to you.
I think I'll take the point of vulnerability and enablement ahead because it is what we are also looking at. And it's exactly, but I'll give it in a very different case. I'll give you two different cases. So last year, we started hiring a lot of people from the community, LGBTQ community, especially trans folks. Hiring trans folks is not the difficult part. That is the easy part. Anything hiring is the most easy part of the whole process. It's about how you retain and how you create that equitable thing. We noticed that an equity gap that existed was that people who are mostly trans folks, they relocate from their current residence because of financial independence. They want to try and they want to transition. And when they come into the cities, that's where generally Godrej properties is situated in, they were not getting accommodation. That is the social barrier that exists. It's a systemic barrier. We needed to remove that barrier. Now, while we realized that this was an issue, we started deciding, okay, let's make a policy around it, where now we start providing the accommodation for them so that at least there is a safe space for them to put. While making the policy, I remember my CHR very clearly saying this, saying that let's look at other pieces. Let's, because we are looking at, we cannot just look at one cohort and say that we're building a policy on that. We have to look at fairness at a point. Do we see single women? Are they facing issues, in this sense? Is religion as a barrier in this sense? After that analysis, a policy is what, 1.5-page document. Okay, frankly speaking, it took us 6 months to develop that document because of the groundwork that goes into it. After looking at the intersectionality, seeing that, okay, this is the barriers that exist and how do we cover the most amount of people in this kind of policy. This is one place where we started looking at intersectionality while looking at a problem. Again, vulnerability and enablement. I love the point. I'm just putting that out here. Another piece of it, I will put it to you, is look at it from a disability sense. So we at GPL don't look at disability as a personal human trait. We look at it as a mismatched human interaction with the world. Now, this mismatched human interaction results in social exclusion, physical exclusion, or cognitive exclusion. Now, how do we kind of elevate this environment so this exclusion is off? When we look at LGBTQ inclusion, we actually see that there is a social exclusion in society, and hence we are upgrading our environment. In the case of disability, and I'll give you this beautiful example thing. So our MD CEO, Gaurav Pandey, was sitting with the architect team and the landscape team with our design team. And the architect and landscape artist was, showing one of our projects, and he was very happy about showing the design. And our MD CEO stops him and says, this is not an inclusive design. That landscape artist is like, you can see I've designed something on this side and you can go behind. And he said, let's not keep disability, let's keep out disability and say that if I am a parent and I have a child with me and I have a pram, how will I take this thing up? It's the same case. There's wheels out here. We're talking in the same case. We're just not talking disability. And hence, how is the experience for me from visiting this particular area? How is it same for me and versus how is it same for another person who is using a wheelchair, or how is it same for a person who is just walking it up? And we have to see that how the experience is same for everyone. I'm saying intersectionality, when we look at disability also, disability is permanent. It can be situational and it can be temporary. Say if I have conjunctivitis today, it is a temporary disability because my vision is impaired. But if my environment is enabled, I won't have that difficulty in that sense. So we are starting to look at, if disability is a problem, even for elder care, people who are growing older, how is it a problem? And then how do we elevate that? I'm saying you're supposed to look at intersectionality in that sense, again, understanding who is the most vulnerable, but fixing for them while fixing for the rest as well.
That's very nicely put, Zoya. And again, very clear practitioner's perspective, because when you fix for one group and you have a set of questions that you ask to fix for one cohort, naturally other discoveries. For example, you spoke about the case of single women, right? And accommodation being a challenge, and safety and other aspects being a challenge, or religious minorities. So those are all nuances, and these are all examples of great enablers that organizations can provide to truly embrace intersectionality. Because again, at Avatar, we have created nice frameworks for career enablement. In the initial years, it was majorly for women, and there were organizations that applied it successfully. But increasingly over the years, we have seen layers being added to it. We have seen those nuances being added to it, especially companies which have fairly matured in their understanding of DEI. They have catered to the bare minimum. The basics have been taken care of, and the enablement framework is also there. And the fact is that for every individual, that enablement of whatever are their vulnerabilities, I think that's when they feel belonged. That's when they actually identify with the organization. And again, your analogies of anything with a wheel, right? Requiring, I can't tell you the number of stores I couldn't enter because there wouldn't be a proper mechanism to take the pram inside, and it would just be too clumsy for a mother of a toddler, two toddlers at that point, to actually try to get into that space. But I'd never thought that, okay, there could be a solution to the problem the way you mentioned, which then becomes an enablement in so many other ways, right? So very nicely put, Soya. I think we have around 10 minutes left, and as we wait for a few questions from our participants to pop in, I have one question for you. I think we looked at the past, we looked quite a bit deep into the present. So now let's look forward. What do you think, or how do you think this future landscape of understanding and embracing intersectionality is going to evolve? And what are some of those tools or aids that can help, that we can utilize as we look into the future? So that's my question. And Sheer, if you can take that.
Sure. I think part answer was given by Zoya. I think it's if my reading is correct, I think biggest advances, I think, would happen on the marketing side, would happen on the product development side. I think companies are more and more understanding and embracing this, that diversity is obviously the right thing to do, inclusion is the right thing to do, but it's also the more sustainable and profitable thing to do in the long run. I think that will be the driving force. And obviously, organizations will toe the line, because obviously there are social pressures in today's society. Hopefully, what is going to happen is that in trying to make this pragmatic ends meet goals of profitability and all, I think somewhere down the line, I think organization would also say that as a citizen, as a citizen, as a human being, as a citizen of the company, we spoke about values. I think there are things we also value, and this is what it means to be a member of this organization. I think a lot of posturing happens, and it's understandable. I think we can't have all perfect things in the world, but a lot of posturing happens. I hope, I think that is one change that happens. I think people start meaning what they say. People start becoming more inclusive, and start paying attention to intersectionality, especially through that lens, that we say that it's essentially a compassionate stance, and not just beyond a compassionate stand, it's entitlement. We're in a civilization where the society and structure actually shields you. If it shields you and you're benefiting from it, it only makes sense that you offer the same to every other member of society. I mean, if it was really survival of the fittest, I don't think I would survive. So I survive. So it's my moral responsibility to make sure anyone who struggles to survive gets the same kind of attention. I think next journey would be first for profit, then it would ideally move to compassionate, and then it will move to entitled, that people deserve it and we're obligated to provide to them. Yeah. just projecting something out there in future.
That's an excellent projection, Shir, and a great, insight into what compassion can do, and probably that getting to, entitlement at a point, because then people decide to use their privileges in the right way, channelize their privileges in the right channels, right? A great way of putting it. Zoya, I need to ask you about the future. You have given us some excellent solutions of the present, so let me ask you about the future. We have a couple of very interesting questions on the chat window. I'll take them soon after you address this. Yeah.
I think for personally, I feel from a future perspective, it is how we as humans zoom. Where do we zoom in and where do we zoom out? That's where intersectionality for me will play out. Um, the problem with intersectionality or looking at intersectionality can also be is that we look at the multitude boxes that humans create. Humans love to create boxes, and we like to put people into boxes also. So whenever we do like a sensitization on LGBTQ, the first thing people jump into is understanding what is lesbian, what is gay, what is bisexual, what is trans, oh, what is Q, what is plus. They forget the logic behind the terms. If you look at gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression in its core sense, and you understand that it is a spectrum, once you understand that spectrum, then the evolution of language and with the number of words that come in will not affect. If you understand the core principle of what is interconnectedness, then the number of words that will keep evolving, you will not need to look into that. I feel that is where you need to zoom in into the problems, you need to zoom in into the barriers and remove those barriers, and not zoom into the meanings of each identity. I think so. Like say for example, my personal, if somebody has to make an intersectional introduction of me, they would put me in boxes like saying trans person, queer, Indian, born in a Muslim family, uh, neurodiverse, with a particular sex, coming from a particular education background. All of these things will make me as a human being, but I'd still be Zoya only. I would be the same person irrespective of these multiple boxes that you put me into. I would consider myself to be a global citizen rather than divided by borders or divided by this. And I think I would want that barriers to not be seen is where I see. It's not so much of an structure; it's just more of a hope, if I put it that way. Yeah.
Yes, we're talking about the future. We need to talk about
Yes,
hope, and
little.
it's about getting out of the box or unbox, whatever we want to call it. But the fact that let's shine the spotlight on the challenges and not on
Yeah.
the identities, right? Because that's when solutions emerge. Great way of putting it. So, yeah. Uh, we have two questions. Let's quickly take them. The first question is interesting and something that can give very personal takeaways to all in the audience today. So, our own understanding of intersectionality has evolved over time. What advice would you give to individuals who are starting to explore the concept of intersectionality and its implications for their own, perspectives? So, if there are two things that we would want to say to people who are starting to explore this, what would that be? Shir, over to you.
I think I'll talk about one that's very loud in my mind. I think stories are individual experiences. They are, like Zoya says, they can't be boxed. They're raw. You make sense of them the way you want to make sense of them, but they are what they are. Uh, I'll give an example. We we've had multiple. We invite individuals to come and share their interesting stories with us. Uh, we've had multiple PWDs who have come here and in our organization shared their story. We had a woman who came, and she was not as privileged as others, especially from the socioeconomic standpoint. And as she was talking about her story, she moved to a place where she started talking about sexual abuse as a disabled person, because your mind usually doesn't go there, but it is reality. So you're a woman, but you're also disabled in a certain way. And if you can't scream, you are really, truly vulnerable. And I remember when that conversation was over, so many women actually came up to me and said that we thought we had challenges. And but we realized we don't have challenges. I think we feel a lot of times we are very complacent because we are not acting enough, because we should be acting enough when we hear such stories. I think I think that is something that to me is the starting point. I think it really shakes you up when you hear stories, and I've heard stories of individuals who are in the intersection of uh, being PWD and gay, uh, being being a Dalit, being gay, and being homosexual and a lesbian. It creates interesting hues and patterns, and it really, really makes you think about the abstraction we use. When we put things in boxes, we do it so that our mind is at peace, actually, because when we get into the rawness of it, it really, really perturbs you. I think if we don't run away from that rawness and get into it and deal with it raw, I think those stories really wake you up. Anything and everything I know about intersectionality, I would say, is essentially through these stories. So I would say stories, hear them, talk about them, the best way to uh, get started. Yeah.
Absolutely, Sher. There is so much of power in storytelling. I think we all grew up mesmerized by the power of stories, but somewhere along the way, I think we discarded what stories could do, and we got so caught up with life and growth and professional context, right? But nothing connects better than a story. With you on that, thank you so. Over to you, Zoya. What is that advice that you would want to give to somebody starting to explore intersectionality?
I think in my previous question I said
Yeah.
don't look at the identity, look at the problem and fix that. I really like what Shishir said, and I think for me, sexual harassment or sexual abuse is the only thing that has uniformity. You'll find uniformity in sexual abuse to irrespective of which caste, which creed, which identity there is. That is one thing, which is the sad piece of it. But yeah, I think storytelling is one aspect, but uh, what is in that story, and what is understanding from the stories where is the issue, and then picking up from that. I think let's look at intersectionality in that view, that how, going back to the point what Shishir said about understanding the vulnerability, and then how can you make that enabling? Because from a DEI professional perspective, my job is only to identify systemic issues and uplift it, and then make the start line same for everyone. Once the start line is same for everyone, then the person's performance is the key to it. And that's how it proceeds. If there is a barrier after performing also, then you're supposed to see that how you remove that barrier. And my job is only to remove barriers. Once the barriers are removed, how does it become sustainable is how I would tell you to look at intersectionality. So look at how multiple identities play out. How does it stop you, or how does it stop them from like, growing or having a life in that sense? Is how.
Absolutely, very well put, Zoya. I think the applying the analytical sensibility into the stories that you hear, into the experiences that you see, and seeing how that can be consumed in a way that you really can become an ally. Because our last question, and I think we have 3 minutes on the clock, but I really need to ask this. So, becoming an ally is one thing. The next question that our audience is asking us is about advocacy. So, how does an individual begin advocating for a more inclusive and nuanced understanding of intersectionality? Because what I feel is from allyship to advocacy, there is a long road. And getting there requires a lot of courage, fearlessness, and being comfortable with your own vulnerability, right? So, how do you think one can get started with advocacy? And this probably will resonate a lot with leaders and practitioners who have it in them to actually be advocates. Shir, can you take that? And then I'll move over to you, Zoya.
Yes, I think allyship obviously matters a lot. I think if I could dare, uh, you know, uh, impinge on the question and actually expand allyship to say even those who are victims of oppression, I think sometimes, uh, especially through the lens of intersectionality, sometimes they become the hurdle for any
Mm.
progress. Let me take the example of of the US society. And when I obviously am talking about these identities as monoliths, they are not monoliths. Obviously, I'm using it as like an analytical device to talk about it. But if you look at all the work that has happened, and probably one of the reasons why intersectionality came to fore was essentially the mix of race and gender in the US. And we can also obviously borrow it and talk about a caste and gender in India because it's matter. It's important. But essentially, if you use the US example, the benefits of allyship, the benefits of the feminist progress that has happened, actually did not help trans women in the US. They did not help Black women in the US. They did not help Black trans women in the US. Now, that to me is a little bit of a problem because even when we talk about allies, not looking at intersectionality essentially means that you start seeing power dynamics develop even in a group. When you say women, you would start seeing a power dynamic develop even within that group, subset of a group of cisgender, let me not say cisgender, women. And you would see that within that group, there would be gradation of privileges that would appear. I think the solution there is very, very simple that you look inward. And I think a lot of, you'd be surprised how many DI professionals and activists actually are so keen on looking outside and taking a critical view of what's happening rather than looking inward and fully appreciating uh, the privileges they have and the kind of dynamic they create themselves. And I'm very vocal when I talk about this with LGBTQ people. Maybe not the right forum to take that angle, but my belief is that if we want women as a whole to progress, we want women to actually ask this question: who among us the most privileged? And start saying, okay, if I'm privileged, what am I doing with my privilege? If I'm a woman who had access to the best of education and I became a CEO, what am I doing to bring uh, the other groups who are marginalized within this because of intersections of various identities? Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm just saying that with those men who need to be allies and support women, but I'm saying that all that has happened, and yet it has not helped a certain section of of group. I think that's how I say it. I think women need to start talking about this. Obviously, eventually, allies would also start talking about it. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Shir, and yeah, telling us, asking us to ask ourselves those questions, right, in terms of discovering how to become an advocate. And over to you, Zoya, the very last question that we have today. So, how do you think from ally to being an advocate? What does that take?
I think let's keep the jargons aside. If I have to make two Venn diagrams, uh, advocacy and advocate would be a subset of allyship, and that's how I see it. To be an ally, you need to do three simple things. You need to educate yourself on that particular cohort or on those things. You need to be visible as an ally, and you can't be that person saying that I'm your friend, but don't tell anybody else that I'm your friend. You need to be visible, and lastly, you need to speak up when you see problems happening. You need to speak up, and that is what allyship is. And advocacy is a part of this, because when you start speaking up, and going back to your earlier question of power and privilege, combined with your power and privilege that you have, and you speak up, is when you will be able to make the changes that we want to see. I think that's how I kind of see this. I'll give you one example. So when I was being hired in this company, my CHRO, who I report to, Megha Goel, she made this one beautiful statement to me. Okay, and you'll understand how allyship and advocacy plays out. She told me that it's taken 200 years for women to get where we are, and it's still not equal. I would want this journey to be smaller for the other cohorts that we pay attention to. And that's where she's using her privilege, she's understanding, she's using her power, understanding that this journey needs to be small. We need to elevate this and take this ahead for sure, but for the others we need to. And that is the power of allyship, that is the power of advocacy, and I'd leave it at that for you.
That's a very high note to end this extremely, insightful session. So many takeaways for me, so many moments that I will remember for a lifetime in terms of the learning that I've had, on how to look at certain aspects. Beautiful discussion. Thank you for joining us today, Zoya and Sheer. We absolutely loved it, and I'm sure our audience are already on that path of definitely becoming allies and advocates. So. Thank you so much. And with that, I hand it back to you, Sumona.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such an informative, inspirational, and beautiful conversation. Thank you, panelists. And we definitely have so many takeaways, so many thoughts to ponder upon, and also maybe take actions. Thank you, everyone, for such wonderful participation. You have been a wonderful audience. With this, we conclude the 10th day of our month-long celebration, Diversity Mahotsav, powered by partner Kellogg Brown and Root Engineering and Construction India Private Limited, and supporting partners Genesis and EPAM Systems India Private Limited, and our outreach partner MCCI, Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Our social media hashtags, as you all know, are hashtag Diversity Mahotsav, hashtag Celebrating Diversity. Do post your experience at Diversity Mahotsav on your SM handles with the hashtags. On behalf of Team Avatar, I thank each one of you and welcome you to the next stage of Diversity Mahotsav. Please remember, Diversity Mahotsav is between December 1 to 22nd and only on weekdays between 4 to 5 p.m. As we draw close to the day, I am going to request you to take a couple of minutes and provide your feedback on today's session. Please bring up the poll. So as you see the poll questions, the first question is, how would you rate today's session on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the minimum and 5 being the maximum? The second question is, how would you rate today's speaker's session on a scale of 1 to 5? Third, we have, is there anything else you wish the session covered in today's topic? Also, would you like to suggest a topic that you wish to hear from us during Diversity Mahotsav? If yes, please give your suggestion in the text box. And finally, we have the question on what is the takeaway? What is your takeaway from today's session? So you can take a few minutes and fill the poll questions. Thank you so much, everyone. We have another exciting day on Monday, which will be the 11th day of our Diversity Mahotsav. So do tune in for a fireside chat titled Induct, Develop, Engage, and Enable. Sorry, that's a lightning talks that we have, which will feature Kanagam Bihaiti, the project manager Larson and Tobo. Thank you. Also, please feel free to visit myavatar.com to explore various opportunities and activities that celebrate diversity. And if you have not registered at myavatar.com yet, do log on to myavatar.com and register now. Browse through to find jobs that might suit your skill sets, read articles of interest, upskill yourself through various webinars conducted exclusively for you. Signing off today is Sumona Chetia. Take care and stay safe.